Welcome to Spirit Matters. This is Phil Goldberg on behalf of me and my co-host Dennis Ramundi. We're on hiatus now in the summer of 2022. So we're posting some interviews I recorded with leading spiritual teachers last year. They were part of a special series on Unity Online Radio under the title of my book, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times. I'm sure you'll find them illuminating and inspiring. Enjoy.
You can have inner peace and clarity even in the midst of chaos. Welcome to Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times with Phil Goldberg.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this special series of programs. Our goal is to bring you expert advice and guidance for remaining spiritually secure and strong even in the most challenging times. Not just the unprecedented pandemic we've been going through together, but any time the trials and tribulations of our crazy world spring up in your life. Every episode features a wise, compassionate, experienced spiritual teacher whom I've drawn from a broad range of traditions and paths. So I encourage you to write down all the ideas that resonate with you so you'll have an inventory of practices to draw from whenever you need a spiritual boost and a way to reconnect with our divine source. We all have within us a sanctuary of peace, a fortress of strength, not something we have to find or build. It's already present at the core of our being as our truest, deepest, highest self. All the spiritual traditions have the primary purpose of helping us connect with that essential reality, and the more we do, the better equipped we are to face our challenges and take action to make the world a little less crazy. That said, let me introduce today's guest. Sally Kempton has been a widely respected teacher of meditation and spiritual wisdom for more than 40 years now, a former journalist and a former Swami in a Vedic tradition. She's a contributing editor at Yoga Journal, the author of two terrific books, Awakening Shakti, the transformative power of the goddesses of yoga, and Meditation for the Love of It. She teaches online courses and will no doubt once again lead workshops in person when the restrictions are lifted. Her website, where you'll find a wealth of resources, is sallykempton.com. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you, Phil, and it's lovely to be talking to you.
And for me as well. So we're recording this on June 1st, 2021, as we slowly reemerge from the long pandemic. During this past year, what did you find most challenging, both for yourself and the students you no doubt continue to work with?
Oh, very good question. I think for most of the people in my community, the challenges were not so much about getting sick, because most people in my community, were either able to stay home, were in many ways protected from the ravages of the coronavirus. Not everybody, I had some students who had close people die, but I think the greatest challenges had to do with what it is to stay home, that either there are so many people in the house that you're being driven crazy by your family, or you're by yourself, and so that it turned out to be a question for many people of navigating really basic human issues, like how do you have good relationships with the people you live with, such that you're dealing with your conflicts without killing each other, and how do you deal with actual situational loneliness or existential loneliness.
Mm.
And, so it came down, I think, to people learning how to live in their hearts, how to, to actually engage love in circumstances in which it's sometimes difficult, whether it's, in order to be with other people or in order to be with yourself. So in the end, I believe for most of the people in my community, a lot of the challenge had to do with how you are with yourself, therefore how you're able to navigate, this unprecedented situation. So for me, I actually had a pretty good time during the pandemic because I'm naturally, I know, I'm embarrassed.
I know. No, me too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, if you like solitude, I know that you're not in complete solitude, but if you like solitude, if you like less stress, less external stress, there's something really wonderful about not having to go out of the house, not having to see people in person, only talking to the people you really want to talk to, and having a lot of time for practice and self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
and an excuse to say no
and an excuse to say no. Yeah, yeah, and also a way to just be comfortable with your own weirdness. To be really honest, yeah, this was the first long period of time in my life when I actually was able to just fully accept all the ways that I'm weird and unusual, and in the ways that other people are weird and unusual. And there's a tremendous amount of natural self-acceptance that was a part of the fruit of this for me for some reason.
Huh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It was interesting.
Yes, because you spent many years as a renunciate, but you were not alone all the time.
No.
Right? You were in a community, which is, can be very demanding in different ways. How did you help the people in your life, the students who are not as comfortable being alone?
Well, I taught a bunch of 6-week courses during the pandemic, and the subject of most of them was Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. Mm-hmm. So we took this time to go really deep into a set of yogic meditation practices, many of which were new to people, most of which involved getting very intimate and comfortable with your inner energy body and actually working with the mind. So we were working with very classical yogic practices for witnessing the mind, for surrender, for actually committing ourselves to making steady daily effort in meditation and taking those efforts into daily life. And it was tremendously helpful to people to actually make that commitment to daily practice and to do it in creative ways, because when you really go into the texts, the yoga texts, what you discover is that there are some practices which open up levels of experience that can be completely new and that you don't find when you're not experimenting with them. So we did a lot of experimenting, and people said that it made a huge difference. I think partly because in my community, people tend to be pretty willing to commit to deep spiritual work, and as you said earlier, pretty happy to have an excuse to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Interesting. And so you were dealing with Patanjali's Yoga Sutras a lot. So I have to ask what you did about the cities portion of it. Which for people listening who don't know the word cities refers to what are often called supernormal powers or that sort of thing.
Yes, very good question. And what Phil didn't say is that generally speaking, most commentators on the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras has this long list of supernatural powers that you can cultivate through particular practices. Therefore, advanced meditators, and they don't really give the instructions. So they'll say by meditating on the heart, you can, or by there's actually a particular practice called samyama, where you combine concentration, meditation, and complete absorption. And if you have that capacity, then you can engage the siddhis. So one of them says by samyama on the heart, knowledge of past lives arises. Now, I've never had that experience, and I do samyama on the heart a lot. But what I came to feel is that the siddhis chapters actually are useful in that they explain that we do have these innate powers, these innate supernormal powers that are natural to human beings, and whether or not you deliberately cultivate them, which, as you know, Patanjali, the commentators on Patanjali, and everybody else in the Indian tradition says, never cultivate siddhis. They're a bad idea. They take your mind away from your goal, from your spiritual goal. And if siddhis should by any chance come to you, reject them, refuse to do them. So, and that's a very sensible prescription, especially when applied to advanced yogis who do acquire a lot of supernatural powers, supernormal powers. But what I have discovered is that for normal people, as long as you can keep yourself from believing that let's call them psychic powers, although that's a term that has a lot of implications, but that when we do spiritual practice, we gain a lot of abilities, or we gain access to a lot of abilities, which are very useful in daily life. And these can range, as you know, from a capacity to notice what's going on in your own body and even sometimes heal it, to insight into other people. So there a lot of these particular gifts that come with spiritual practice are awakenings of normal powers that all human beings have and should have access to. And so that's what I emphasize. I emphasized the fact that through yoga, we come to know our deep capacities in ways that otherwise we generally don't. But and we emphasized a lot the great siddhi, which is self-realization, and all its permutations.
Well, that's great. Thanks for keeping it real. I'm glad I asked that question.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
The other thing about those sections of the Yoga Sutras is most people just don't talk about them.
Exactly. Exactly.
Let's skip that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't know if you want to talk about pedagogy here.
No.
Okay.
No, we can.
Well, the thing I discovered about studying this text is that, first of all, the Yoga Sutra is not a popular text in today's times, and one reason is because it's seen as a text for renunciants and basically professional meditators. So, in order to make it accessible to people, you really have to open it up and make it very, daily life oriented. And if you do that, what you realize is that it is an incredible cookbook for becoming familiar with different spiritual practices and modalities, every one of which is powerful. And the thing about studying texts like this as a spiritual practice is that it can often introduce you to aspects of spiritual life that you wouldn't ordinarily think about, and which can turn out to be tremendously helpful. So that was what was exciting to me, and I think to other people about studying that text and the other thing is, I wanted to talk more about modalities, but one of the things that I've noticed about working with your own difficulties and with the difficulties in society through spiritual work is that there are several focal points, and that we tend to be temperamentally drawn to one or another of them. So, for instance, a lot of people in the contemporary spiritual world tend to focus on awareness of awareness and witnessing and, cultivating the capacity for seeing everything that's you're experiencing as arising inside awareness and gradually letting yourself be awareness, which I'm sure you also experience as an incredible, right? I mean, it's a very fundamental direct path practice, and it's one of the best ways there is to keep yourself in some sort of balance when life is full of upheaval. So, whereas there are other people, and and I would say I'm one of them in general, who focus on the heart and they cultivate the energy of joy in the heart, and look at being grounded in the heart as really the basis for staying grounded in the rest of your life. And then there are those who work with the lower belly, which is actually probably more grounding than either of these other two centers. But one thing that I've found is really important in living a life that's inwardly centered and outwardly active is to somehow keep a balance between these three centers. So, and to know, in a sense, which center to cultivate under different circumstances. So, if you're interested in talking about that, I can say a little bit about that, and I'd be very interested to know what your experience of this approach to practice is.
Well, let's talk about it now then. You talk about three centers. I want to hear how our listeners can use this insight that you have about learning when to cultivate or to put attention on each of those three centers you mentioned.
Okay, so one of the difficulties that people have when they're starting a spiritual journey, and for quite a while in the spiritual journey, is that we don't have full access to our inner energy body. And partly that's, of course, because our tendency is to externalize our attention. Interiorizing attention is something that we need to learn how to do, and the practice of mindfulness, of paying attention to the breath and then noticing the types of thoughts that are coming up seems to be these days the way most people find easiest to enter into some level of interiority. So there's a step past mindfulness where you actually begin to tune into that aspect of your own mind, call it, that's simply present to experience, which we generally call awareness, and or the witness, to be able to tune into that. And you start by being mindful of the breath, mindful of the body, which means just focusing, concentrating, and you gradually become aware of what's aware of, what that aspect of yourself that's able to be mindful, and you become aware that this aspect of yourself is present even when it's not focused on anything. And and gradually it starts to become possible to notice that there is a kind of field within which your experience is happening, and that it's both inside your body and outside your body. Mm-hmm. So that's what I would call, and that experience generally happens through the intellect, through or through what we call the head center or the third eye center. It's very much an intellectually focused experience, although to call it intellectually focused is a bit misleading. Yeah. But
the yogic concept of the intellect is a very different from our ordinary usage. But,
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so by intellect we don't mean the part of you that ruminates and judges and gets ideas, but actually the part of you that's able to, as it were, perceive without emotional coloring. Mm. And and that's the faculty that comes online as we when we practice mindfulness, and that we can sort of ride to the experience of what it is that's not only mindful, but what it is that perceives and experiences our life. And I'm assuming that many of your listeners are familiar with this practice or with witness awareness. but it's, in my experience, it is really the fail-safe method for stepping back from upsetting things, including those upsetting things that are coming, that are coming up from within you, your past wounds, the feelings that get triggered by events and other people, and that that the witness, or this capacity to sort of step back, take a backward step, as I think it's Adyashanti says, just like come behind yourself and observe from there. It saves you from a lot of tsuris and heartbreak, and it's an extremely important practice, especially if you can do it without dissociating, without leaving your body and and going into a kind of dissociated state. And I would say for years, and this may be true for you as well, when things got really rough in my life and on the outside, and when I was feeling crazy, my fail-safe method for bringing myself back to some form of stability would be to remember the witness, to go, okay, who is it that knows I'm having this experience? Who is it that knows it's, that this stuff is happening? And that just by asking the question, and I know you're very familiar with this practice, I would, there would be a sort of field ground shift, and I would find myself positioned kind of behind my mind. And if I could keep returning to that awareness, it would, awareness has this amazing quality of dissolving anything that it comes in contact with. So if you can stay poised in awareness, you start to notice that everything is coming and going, arising and subsiding, including your sense, including your own feelings. And suddenly you become a great deal freer in that moment. So it's an unbelievably significant and important practice, grounding practice. So I hope I've explained this well enough for.
Oh, very well. But I sense a but coming up.
Well, the but, yeah. So the but is that, generally speaking, awareness practice or witness practice, it takes a long time before you recognize that there's actually that there's love in it, that there's an affective tenderness in it. It's, that eventually, if you do enough awareness practice, you do realize that awareness is also love. But so meditating in the heart center, then becomes another one of those deep grounding practices, except that when you begin to cultivate the heart center, and I'll say a little bit more about the process if you like. As you begin to cultivate the heart center, several things happen. One is that you do begin to become aware of the energy of the heart space, which tends to be naturally, the word I like is tender, sweet. It sometimes has the flavor of compassion. Sometimes it's more energetically intense, but its natural quality is loving. Now, that said, and the glitch in heart center meditation is that many of your emotions, especially the wounding emotions, are situated in, kind of as layers around the energy of the heart. So when you first begin tuning into the heart, you're often going to come up with, feelings of anger, feelings of grief, feelings of sadness. They just come up, and in my practice experience, especially in the early years when I was really trying to carve out a practice path for myself, I would notice that when I cultivated the heart center, there would be enormous joy and bliss that would arise, and also a lot of emotion, some of which was pretty hard to handle. And then the practice of awareness of who is it that knows I'm feeling this became tremendously helpful. And there was something that I discovered about toggling between heart awareness and, awareness of awareness itself that has, I believe, is the basic, it's the basic, what would you call it, template for a genuine spiritual path that needs to connect the awareness, which is objective, and the heart, which is tender. You know, so that's what I try to help my students cultivate. It's what I just, it's what I cultivate. And
Mhm.
there's so many yogic practices for working with these two centers, beyond the standard, who knows, I'm thinking, or, let's say placing a mantra in the heart, which is, of course, the classic way of beginning to open the heart.
Mm.
There's so many other practices that we can experiment with. And, if there's time in your life, and if you're interested, it's kind of like you can begin once you have created an awareness of these centers. And I'll say something about the belly center in a minute.
No, you'll say it after our break.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to complete that sentence first?
So in the process of experiencing the radical importance of staying connected in both these centers, you learn how in every situation there's a practice, or there's a way of thinking that will help you stay in balance. As long and let me just say this one more thing before the break. As long as you have an inner body awareness, so that's the clue, is staying close to your inner body, whether it's in the heart or in the awareness space. So, okay.
Good. Now we will have our unity break, and we'll be right back with Sally Kempton.
Welcome back to Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times with your host, Phil Goldberg.
Welcome back. We're here with Sally Kempton, and she was leading us through some practices or ways to conceptualize witnessing awareness and being in what she calls heart awareness, which to me sounds like a very good combination of sort of transcendence and being immanent in the world. Now, you were also going to talk about a third energy center.
Yeah, so the third energy center, which, of course, in martial arts is called the hara, or the lower dantian in Chinese, I can, if, in my tradition, the ultimate reality is described as Sat Chit Ananda, being, intelligence, and blissfulness. And these three centers actually match that description. So if we can say that the head center is the center of intelligence or awareness, the heart center is the center of bliss or love, the belly center is the center of being. And so if you can manage to ground yourself in the belly center, which is not that easy for most people because, we're a society which tends to, kind of erupt upward into the mind. So getting your attention to the heart is a big deal for many people. Getting your attention to the belly the belly is often a dark area for us. And, especially if you've had a standard yogic spiritual education and told that the lower chakras are bad and that your job is to get into the upper chakras, that to come to the point which, I don't know about you, but after I've been doing spiritual practice for 15 years, when I became aware that my lower body, from below the heart, was pretty much numb, even though I did yoga and took walks and stuff, and that it actually for health, which is where I started, it was really important to start, exploring the belly and exploring the three lower chakras. So And of course, there's lots of schmutz in the lower chakras, but
You keep
especially,
using these Sanskrit terms like tsuris and schmutz, Sally.
yes, I know, I can't help it. Yes. Should I provide a translation?
Please.
Okay, so tsuris means trouble. It's pretty much the word for everything that's going on right now in the world. And schmutz means all the accretions, what in yoga are called the impurities, that and difficult emotions that have been deposited in our energy system by all of our years of suffering and misunderstanding, and the rest of the downsides of human existence. I call it schmutz because it kind of it forms a sort of barrier that actually makes it hard to experience what Phil was very beautifully talking about in the beginning of the program, the utterly unbroken true self, which is never bothered, never dies, and is a source of pure awareness and pure joy. But the schmutz blocks it, as we know.
Just for listeners, I was joking when I said those are Sanskrit terms.
No, right. They're Yiddish, guys.
They're Yiddish, and Yiddish has this great quality of onomatopoeia. It's the namarupa, as they say, of Yiddish is great, and schmutz is one of those words. It means what it sounds like.
And tsuris is pretty good, too.
Yeah.
And what about schlemiel?
Oh, boy.
Yeah, so let's a shout out for the nearly dead, nearly defunct great language of Yiddish. But I'm a New Yorker, so in New
So
York,
am I.
right? So in New York, even people who aren't Jewish know a few words in Yiddish.
Yeah.
So belly center.
Yes.
So cultivating the belly center is it takes a while for many of us, and I did many years of certain qigong practices, where certain qigong postures and breathing practices where you just try to get your breath down to the belly, and then there's a point where you actually can feel your inner belly, and when you can, it almost becomes like a kind of cauldron within which you can offer your schmutz, and it will, in some mysterious way, dissolve and transform it. And I guess the thing that as I was thinking about, this conversation this morning, one of the things that occurs to me is that all of us as human beings, we need a place to deposit our pain, so that we can stop identifying with it, so that we can handle it. Certain kinds of emotional pain and physical pain are very, very difficult to endure, and often we can't make it go away. So part of the job of spiritual practice is to give us a resting place where we can take ourselves when we are in pain and almost offer the pain into that center, with the hope that our deeper self, the energies of our deeper self, will rise up and assimilate and metabolize the pain. So, and I found that for emotional pain, for the pain of, your deep unprocessed tendencies which come up from time to time, that if you can ground in the belly and take your seat there and really let yourself hold your discomfort in the belly as though you were holding it in a kind of a cauldron, or a warming pad, if that makes sense. Those old warming pans that you put coals in, and you would use them in olden times to warm a freezing cold bed in northern countries. Well, in a certain way, your hot emotions, your painful emotions, can be held kind of in the container of awareness with your attention in the belly, and that this mysterious power that we have in our human consciousness will begin to dissolve, resolve, and basically metabolize discomfort. And of course, if uh, it's often necessary to just to do this again and again and again, but it really works. And over time, it does. You know, you find yourself after practicing in these three centers over a period of time. You know, you find that you have the groundedness of the belly center, you know, which is a kind of a wordless place. It's a lot easier to not engage in painful thoughts or, you know, distracting thoughts when you're centered in the belly. You have the heart center, which will activate your natural affection and compassion. You have the head center, where you can become aware that your true nature is pure awareness. And you can kind of segue between these aspects of yourself, and this actually will integrate parts of your being that often under normal circumstances remain out of touch with each other. You know, so Phil, do you have a
Yes,
comment?
no, I'm glad you used the word integrate, because that's what was coming up for me as you described it. I thought this sounds like a very integrative way to look at these things. And just on a personal note, it gives your description of the belly center, the dantian, it gives a little more clarity from my own experience, because I'd been meditating regularly for, I don't know how many, 30 years or more. And then I started taking Tai Chi and Qigong classes, and I found it, remarkably grounding to do that.
Yeah.
And I think, this is a sort of good explanation for that. I'm going to segue now to something I saw on your website. There's an article posted called Bouncing Back.
Ah,
You talk about, to quote you, a deep, secret, and subtle kind of resilience. Now, resilience is obviously something that's much talked about these days. It's something we all need to cultivate, especially when times are difficult, as they have been for all of us. Tell us about that special kind of resilience you're talking about.
well, on resilience. There's been a lot, as you know, there's been a lot of work done on resilience and
Mm-hmm.
on the qualities that make people who have difficult lives resilient. And some of it's very helpful. One of the things I've found, and you can find that if you talk to resilient people, people who've come through really, really tough times, is that you have to have a way of making meaning of your experience, which does not make you feel sorry for yourself, does not make you blame the world or God, but in somehow it's very important to make your experience mean something that's growth producing. And so for instance, one of the people that I interviewed for that article, and I ended up spending a lot of time talking to her about this quality, because she, to me, really exemplifies resilience, was a woman. She was like 18, and she was about to go to college, and she was in a very bad car accident, and it caused a lot of brain damage, which I think for many people is like the worst nightmare, right?
Mm.
She couldn't, she, in many ways, she couldn't function. She couldn't speak as well. Her cognition was damaged, and she had to bring herself back. I'm not sure she has ever fully brought herself back, but the meaning she made of it was that this was an opportunity to look at her life from a completely different perspective. She'd been an intellectual. That was not a possible road for her. And she had to become more in touch with her body and learn to work with her body in therapeutic ways for herself, and that ultimately became a career. So and it was all about, for her, the meaning that she made of the experience, not my life is totally screwed, but what can I do to make this mean something, and to make this part of my growing, to make this, part of my of my happy life rather than of my tragic life. And so I do think that the meaning piece is really critical to resilience. And of course, we get back to Viktor Frankl on that one. And I actually was given a book about 10 years ago called With God in Hell, which was about some of the Eastern European rabbis who were in the camps, and a couple of them who were able to maintain a state of just enormous joy and compassion and helpfulness. And it was all about that. It was all about, what's my life about? I'm not going to abandon what my life is about. I'm just going to possibly have to find a different way of expressing it. So I think that human beings are essentially creative. I feel that this is one of the most intrinsic qualities in human beings. We're makers and doers and creators. So, and if we're not creating something positive, we're going to be creating something negative in our minds. I'm saying, the mind is endlessly making stuff up. So, I do find, and I'm again, this is not something new, that it's why the yogic teaching about taking your mind really seriously and cultivating a way of holding thoughts so that they don't run you around in circles is crucial. So in resilience, you really have to be resilient. That you have to have some way to face your mind when it's telling you that everything is hopeless and the situation is horrible and things are never going to get any better. Just to say something about my own relationship to the current state of the world at this time. I like many other people, I was glued to the media all during the Trump years and terrified about the future of this country. And I apologize to people who have an opposite perspective. I'm sure you have your own version of what I'm about to say. It's and I really began to notice it was partly because of the pandemic. And I was really addicted to the Times, the Washington Post, and and then I started reading Axios and Politico, and pretty soon a good part of my morning was taken up with reading reading the editorials in all these news media and taking in the panic and the fear and the anger, everything else that was being expressed, and I think that we all, as members of the planet, need to be sufficiently aware of all the problems that are, taking over the world and active in them to the degree that we're capable. And yet, learning how to keep the mind from getting lost in the drama of breakdown that, is so easy to do, is one of the main practices for resilience.
Well, I have to now say that I fully identify with what you just said. And in the opening paragraph of the preface to my book with the same title as this show, Spiritual Practice for Crazy Times, I cite a New Yorker cartoon where one character says to the other, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane."
Yes, precisely.
Which is where we all find ourselves from time to time, and especially during turbulent years like the ones we've been through.
Yeah.
Now, you in that context, you talk about making meaning.
Yes.
Now, in my experience, that effort to make meaning of difficult circumstances can be tricky. Do you find people in an effort to make meaning sink into denial or find the wrong meaning or less useful meaning? And how do you help people find the right lessons in these things?
Well, that's a really interesting question because, of course, all the conspiracy theories that are taking over actually come from people's need need and desire to make meaning. And I think one of the things that we can train ourselves in and hopefully help other people see is that perspective taking. I mean, the ability to actually look at situations from not only our perspective, but from the perspective of the others in the situation, and also from a kind of witness perspective, it will help you ask these questions. Things like, is this really true?
Mm.
That Byron Katie question, which, she asks us to apply to our own presuppositions, but you can also apply it to what you're hearing and reading. Is this really true? And just allowing yourself to question. And when I say this, I know it's opening a big can of worms, because the tendency to question is what's leading to anti-vax situations and all kinds of things that, that are, for better or worse, making it very difficult for people in this country, at least, to feel united with each other and to feel that we're members of the same country, the same tribe. But I do think we have to recognize that there are different perspectives, and to learn how to put ourselves into other people's headspace, so that at least we can understand that the meaning that we make for ourselves is not necessarily the only meaning, and not even necessarily the correct meaning, but the meaning that we do need to commit ourselves to lining up the meaning that we make with our own nature. In other words, it has to be true to ourselves, and it has to be not harmful to others. And I think that that's a very good test. Like, do I feel that this is enhancing my ability to know myself as I truly am? Is it enhancing my ability to take my journey in the most empowered way? Is it enhancing my ability to love people? And is it not the kind of understanding which dismisses others, which puts others, into boxes that lets us, stop considering them fully human? In other words, is it not harmful? So there's a lot of inquiry that we need to make when we're trying to understand how and why things are.
And I would think you probably agree with me when I say talking this making meaning bit out with people who know us well is one of the ways to protect ourselves from our own self-delusions and other things. You also talk about, in that article, the danger of processing pain without getting hooked by our suffering. What do you mean by getting hooked?
Well, getting hooked to me means that we start to identify ourselves with our suffering self, with what Eckhart Tolle memorably calls the pain body, which can be any. I mean, so just the thought, and I have this experience quite a lot. I mean, I work with this quite a lot, because I've had a lot of health challenges for the last 20 years. And finding the place where I'm not defining myself as a person with health challenges, and yet at the same time taking care of my health, has really been. It's like a very fine line, right? Because thinking of yourself as sick, or thinking of yourself, as grief-stricken because you've lost someone, these things are true. Illness is real. It's not something we should be in denial of. Loss is real. It's not something we should be in denial of. But somehow we need to be able to experience it without being it, without becoming it. So, and I think that is what it's again, it's one of the heart. It's at the heart of resilience. You can let yourself experience very great difficulties if you can at the same time remember that there is that in you which doesn't change, which is holding it, which is witnessing it, which is in touch with, with positive feelings that, can direct compassion towards yourself, that you have choice in how you feel about something, how you experience something, even if the external experience is quite difficult.
Excellent. Sally, we only have about a minute left. I would invite you to say anything that you want to emphasize to our listeners. And also, do you see positive signs emerging from our collective trauma of the pandemic? And what lessons do you hope we learn? All that in 1 minute.
All that in 1 minute. Well, I do see that there's a tremendous energy of making this society better. And I'm just talking from the perspective of the United States. I know that there's a lot going on in other places in the world, but that the energy of more equality, more more valuing different people's perspectives is very strong now. And I think that is the result of the pandemic. It's the result of the crisis. I have no idea if we're going to be able to carry it through, but it's very hopeful that we're trying. So, and I'm talking about the external situation. I think it's too soon to tell what the emotional effects of the pandemic have been, but I would say that facing the possibility of death is good for everybody. It just makes us more real about our lives. It makes us look at what we value. And if we can hold that awareness that we're not immortal, that death is going to come to us, and therefore, how do we make our lives valuable? How do we use our time? How do we take responsibility for our own experience? It's one of the great lessons of the pandemic. And my hope is that more and more people get that.
I hope so too. And we have no time left. Listeners, you can keep learning from Sally by going to her website, sallykempton.com. You'll find a ton of really good information, including many audio courses and other resources. And be sure to join me again next week. We'll have another wise and wonderful guest. You can find me at my website, philipgoldberg.com. Sign up for my mailings and all the other work I do, and read my books and so forth. And also peruse the archive of the other website that I co-host, Spirit Matters. You'll find a few hundred great interviews with people like Sally and others. So in the meantime, be well, be strong, be safe, and thanks for listening.